We're standing in the Phillips Collection, feasting our eyes upon the magnificent Migration of the Negro series by Jacob Lawrence.
This series is composed of 60 images, all created from 1940 to 1941 out of casein tempera on hardboard. The odd numbers in this collection are displayed at the Phillips Collection, while the even numbers are shown at the Museum of Modern Art.
Hung at eye level in chronological order around the gallery, the paintings are uniformly 12 by 18 inches in size. Each one has a caption written by Lawrence. Today we will be exploring a number of the odd numbers of this eye-opening series.
The Migration of the Negro series displays Lawrence's ethnic pride and reveals events that he felt should be known. It was so much a part of my life. I became conscious of these things when I was 8 or 9 years old, and this consciousness remained, and this is what you see in the migrations, said Lawrence.
Let's start with panel number 1. This piece introduces us to Lawrence's unique style and coloration of dynamic cubism. Unifying the series are consistent colors and a sense of dynamism through the application of flattened angular forms, strong diagonals, and contrasts of light and shadow.
At the same time, it brings the important historical events of the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North to life by drawing upon his own emotional responses to them.
That's right. Joy, terror, hope, and despair, a full spectrum of the African American's journey to avoid discrimination is demonstrated. This allows viewers to experience the truth about the impacts of the migration on the African Americans.
Panel number 1, by coloring the city name signs in orange, Lawrence is able to use the bright contrast to pull viewers' eyes in to discover the historically significant fact. These 3 cities were a couple of the prime locations for migrants, as they believed that the northern cities would have more jobs available, hold less discrimination, and have better conditions than in the South.
However, this southern perspective was a lie that the migration series serves to uncover.
Through panel number 1, Lawrence spurs the curiosity of viewers, prompting the question, what caused so many African Americans to migrate out of the South during this time period?
The succeeding panels in the series serve to answer this question honestly and tell the rest of the story. Crop failures, poverty, and injustices were forces that propelled their anguish and need to leave the South.
Panel number 15 contributes a historically accurate example to respond to this inquiry. Lawrence captioned it, "Another cause was lynching." It was found that there had been a lynching, the people who were reluctant to leave at first immediately after this.
This shocking image is simple, containing only the figure hunched on a rock, a noose hanging from an empty branch, the ground, and the sky with scattered clouds. The amount of open space and lack of any other people or objects around the figure creates a sense of isolation and prompts the feelings of the figure's despair.
In addition to the loneliness, the image of the noose is powerful. It strikes terror with hearts at the violent killings of human beings. It also draws the viewer's attention since the black coloration is the darkest shade in the image and is placed in the center of the piece.
Similar to this jolt of reality that the unsettled individuals responded to, Lawrence's panel number 19 demonstrates another factor for the Great Migration.
The caption reads, "There had always been discrimination."
This image perfectly encapsulates the caption as the African American females are separated from the Caucasian females by a river. While the African American's riverbank is devoid of crops to harvest, the Caucasian's riverbank has many crops. The physical space between the figures really demonstrates Lawrence's point about bigotry in the South and how African Americans were treated poorly. Also, the mountains in the background seem to serve as a visual symbol that there can be a better life for the African Americans on the other side, prompting feelings of hope.
As seen through the panels depicting the South, there was this great hope and expectation that the North was going to be a great safe haven for the African Americans.
But Lawrence reveals that this isn't exactly the case. It may be hard to accept, but the truth is that the North wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. There was still segregation, discrimination, and bad working and living conditions.
Yes, panel 49 shows the segregation perfectly. A gold barrier separates the whites from the blacks, and each figure is quite isolated.
Can especially see this from the size of the African American male in the upper right-hand corner, who is considerably smaller than the other figures around him.
Almost like a hierarchy of scale.
Exactly. And this separation exemplifies the sense of distance that exists both literally and psychologically amongst himself and the other people.
Lawrence has depicted the figures in a way that the viewer would sympathize with the faceless African Americans and disapprove of the cold unfriendliness of the white men.
And through this panel specifically, the viewer gets a very real sense of racism and discrimination that the African Americans still faced in the North.
As well as being segregated and discriminated against, the African Americans were thrown into the tumult of urban life and were overcrowded into unsafe tenements.
Far cry from their spread out land in the South.
This is what resulted in what Lawrence depicted in panel 51. When the African Americans tried to spread out, they were welcomed with race riots and people bombing their homes.
A disappointing scene for the hopeful migrants as their new life burns away. The dark smoke framing the top of the panel almost seems as though it is engulfing the remaining light in the scene, as well as much of the African Americans' remaining hope.
Panel 55 is perhaps the one that opens not only the viewer's eyes, but also the eyes of those depicted in the panels most to the truth. Its simplicity only makes it more painfully real as the heads of 3 women are turned down in silent and accepted defeat as the hard truth of reality weighs them down.
Due to the horrible living conditions of the tenements shown in panel 51, many died of disease, causing the sadness felt by the 3 women in panel 55.
Their all-black dress and solemn demeanor, a far cry from the cheerfulness and array of colors depicted in panel number 1, before they actually got to the North.
So was it really a better life if they were still living in bad conditions, still facing discrimination, and still dying as a result? These are the hard truths. As Picasso said, art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. And even though these are paintings that Lawrence created and not photographs, they are not any less true as Lawrence based them on the actual results of the northern migrations of African Americans. By creating this in-depth series of panels showing the African Americans' journey with hard-hitting images of blank faces and gold barriers, Lawrence is able to convince his viewers of the truth, even though it goes against the common notion of the safe haven North.
This powerful series clearly connects to the recurring theme that the perception of reality is indeed relative. Lawrence's depiction of both Southern and Northern truths highlights the different perspectives of the reality of the life of the African American in the North. Just as immigrants throughout the 20th century believed the United States to be a land whose streets were paved with gold, as depicted in Thomas Cole's The Oxbow, the Southern African Americans believed the North to be some sort of sanctuary. However, through this work, Lawrence depicts that this is certainly not the case. Lawrence boldly questions the common perception that the life of the African American in the North was extremely different from the life of the African American in the South.
In fact, this mistaken perception of life in the North has not faded since its initial creation. For example, in modern-day lower-level history classes, more emphasis is placed upon how much better the life of African Americans in the North was as compared to the South. The brutal segregation of the North is often addressed as merely a cursory detail in the classroom setting.
I agree. Novels like Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass are often used in the classroom setting to support the assertion that the journey to the North was an excruciating but extremely valuable journey. Frederick Douglass is often used to exemplify the advanced conditions of the North. However, Douglass did face numerous struggles upon his arrival in the North. Hence, through this series, Lawrence attempts to challenge this falsified perception of life in the North.
Hence, Lawrence perfectly encapsulates the theme that the perception of reality is relative. The Southern African Americans perceived life in the North to be immaculate, while the Northern African Americans recognized the numerous negative facets of the life of an African American in the North. Hence, the perception of reality in the North is completely relative and dependent upon whether an African American was from Southern or Northern descent.